Welcome back to Between the Levees. I'm joined today, finally, by Captain Chad Leeper. There are some familial connections and some professional as well, but he joins us tonight on the mighty motor vessel Dennis C. Bottorff at Darrow. Just arrived, waiting tug service, dropping 25, I believe. Captain Chad, thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Well, tell me first, how long have you been in the industry?
33 years in the industry, uh, going on 30 in the wheelhouse.
If you don't mind, tell me how different the industry is today than when you started.
Oh, more politically correct for sure. Uh, just a lot more deckhands. Did a lot more with less back then. Uh, I'm try to be politically correct here, but somewhat anyway. Not that the guys don't work hard today too. Just they get a lot more breaks, but just things are different. It's like everything else. I guess you go with the changes.
Your breaks seem problematic, or is it just adding time to your day?
It adds time. I mean, if the company's good with the breaks, then hey, we go with it. It's not that we didn't deserve them back then. So I guess you just got to balance it out. I guess.
Well, we'll get into some of those stories here as we go. How long have you been with Ingram now?
This go around, which is actually my third go around with Ingram. Uh, this go around is going on about 18 months.
Okay, I feel like our careers may have moved a little bit in parallel. Were you with AEP in 2015?
I was.
Yeah, that's
I
far.
went there in 2013, and I left after the merger with ACBL when they bought them out. I went back to Turn Services. So I was there about 3 years before they were bought.
All right, well, we got a lot of ground to cover, but let's start a little bit differently. Of course, you knew my cousin back in your old racing days when he was in
Yeah.
college. If I may, what car did you have, and how did it measure up against that silver Trans Am?
Actually, we both had Trans Ams, and back then he was actually a little quicker than me. Back then, Justin he had a bad little car back then, and I still have my car. I'm not sure if he still has his. I know he just bought my wheels back from him. Funny story, but when he was parting that car out, I bought a set of wheels from him, and I put them up for sale. I guess on Facebook here. I guess 2 or 3 months ago. He was the only person messaged me and said, "Hey, I'd like to buy them back." 20 years later, I'm like, "You can have them." So I pretty much sold them back to him for what I paid for them.
Yeah, I
So
never got to ride in or see it in action. There was a couple of videos I saw at the track, but we
yeah,
certainly knew when he was on campus at Southeastern, man. You could hear that thing anywhere.
yeah.
But anyway, I know he's a faithful listener, or at least used to be. I hadn't talked to him about this in quite a while, but he actually was the first one to recommend getting you on.
Oh, good. Yeah.
And since then, I've had a couple of guests, that Justin Montgomery being one of them. There's a couple others I
Hmm.
can't remember, but that were trained by you. So I think we have a fair amount to cover here tonight.
Okay.
Well, how did you find your way into the industry?
My dad was a captain here at Darrow Fleet, and used to run the Okaloosa. And my brothers all gave it a shot. They came out here, and one of my brothers actually went in the river here at Darrow Fleet. They were working on a Shelley at the time, and one of the things I was saying about the more deckhands, my brother was by himself working. So when he went in the river in front of the boat, my dad had to run out the wheelhouse, go down and pull him up out the water. And they had a broken headline that was hanging in the water that he told my brother to change, and he never changed it. And I guess it's a good thing he didn't, because when my dad couldn't find him and he decided to pull that line, he pulled it up and my brother was on the end of it. So that was it. He quit the river. And my dad told me, "You're not coming out there. I don't want you out there. Do something else." And, I tried a few other jobs, and 18 years old, told Dad I'm coming on the river, and he didn't want me to. He goes, "Well, you do it, but as soon as you find something else, I want you off the boats." And here I am, still here. So
Just
this is
how
where I
long?
started, right here at Darrow.
Okay, how long was your dad on the water?
Oh, from the early '70s till I think around 2011, he had a stroke and had to retire. So he retired about 2011, 2012, somewhere in there. Um, and he passed away in 2020.
Sorry
So
to hear that. Was he the first one in the family to be in the industry?
he was. Yeah, he just happened to get a job out here, and then he went to running a crew boat for uh, Charlie Metcalf down there at Huey Long Fleet. And they had some barges broke out the fleet, and the fleet tugs was sleeping. And Dad ran out there and caught them with a crew boat, brought the barges back to the fleet with a crew boat. And next day, Charlie said, "You want a job in the wheelhouse?" And put him in the wheelhouse.
And that was in the
So
70s, you said?
I I'm pretty sure it was around '76 when Dad started on the boats.
And have y'all been in Louisiana your whole life?
Yeah, we moved away to Mississippi for a couple of years back in early '80s, and then we moved back. I think around '83, '84. So we moved back to Covington area, Bush.
Were you
But
born on the North Shore?
no, I was born at East Jefferson down in Metairie.
Well, tell me about your childhood and I guess kind of what led you up to age 18, working those jobs and then getting out on the river.
All right, well, we moved a lot. Mom and Dad, they didn't stay in one house very long. I think through my childhood years until I was 18 and moved out on my own, we lived in 26 different houses. So we jumped a lot. And Ponchatoula, Hammond, Covington, Metairie, New Orleans, different spots. Tried the Mississippi thing. And then when I was 13, actually, that all happened by the time I was 13, because when we were 13, we moved to Ponchatoula and they still in that spot. The house had burnt back in 2015, but they built another one in the same location. So they've been there all that time. And but yeah, that's what we did growing up, just moved a lot. And guess 18, I was with my current wife. I've been married to her the whole time, but since 17, and at 18 we got married and had a baby on the way, and we wound up losing the baby the day before I started decking out here on the water at Darrow, and kind of made me turn into a man at a young age. That changed me, and been out here ever since. So before that, I didn't stick with too many jobs. I quit them pretty easy. After that happened, I pretty much stayed in one place till I had something else pretty pretty good job to go to. The only time I ever left one. So
Well, fill me in on your introduction to the industry in the early to mid 90s.
well, like I said, Dad was running the Okaloosa, and I went on there with him. And at that time, we did have some older deckhands on the boat, uh, very experienced. But back then, my dad was hell on wheels, so you either loved him or hated him. And he could be pretty rough on a deck crew, but if you did your job, he treated you right. And these two guys, man, I didn't like hearing them talk about, cut your daddy's throat, and I didn't want to run up to the wheelhouse and tell them either that they talking about him. So I just said, look, I think I want to go to the fleet and get off this boat. So I went to the fleet and I worked there for 3 years at Darrow in the fleet. And so I didn't get a whole lot of riding time with my dad. Most of it was here in the fleet. And you didn't get too much training time either. So once I pulled a couple hitches by, working with other guys, I was on my own. So I liked it here because we Well, back then Ingram used to turn out of this fleet, and we had a rigging crew, so I got to go build tow with a rigging crew, and uh, did a lot of tow building. And Darrow fleet, you get every company stops in here to drop barges, so I got to go out there on the deck with a bunch of different companies, and you learn everybody's different ways of doing things, and not just one company. One company's policy on how they lay their wires. You worked with all kinds of them, so you got to learn a lot, and uh, I liked it here. Back then Darrow was a pretty good place to work. I'm not saying it's not now, but I don't know. I don't work here, so. But it was a pretty good place back then, and my first time going to Ingram was actually before I got in the wheelhouse. I wanted to go work for Ingram, ride in different parts of the country. So I took a job at Ingram Towing back then. It's a division. They pushed asphalt, um, six oil, things like that. A lot of, well, I went on a 10 time running with rock barges, and then they wound up selling it out to coastal towing. And that's when I left, come back to Darrow for a little while because I got my license around that same time. So going in the steersman program for Ingram kind of got thrown out the water because they sold the coastal. So I come back to Darrow with a license. Didn't have to do a steersman program back then, but I did it the whole time I was a deckhand. I'd turn the barge loose, run up to the wheelhouse, bring it where it had to go, land it, run out there, tie it off to the point where the captain I worked with. One day I was landing the barge and I looked back, he was putting his life vest and a pair of gloves on, and I'm like, "What are you doing?" And Jack Jenkins, he said, "I'm gonna go tie you off." Okay, so that got to be a regular thing. He did it quite often for me and just let me run the boat. So uh, when it was time for me and I got my license, the river was pretty hot. It was 16 and a half foot or so, and they didn't quite open the spillway as much back then, but the river was pretty hot. So the port captain here at Darrow said, "Well, I'm not going to cut you loose in this river stage, but if you can hang in there with me till the river goes down some, we'll put you in the wheelhouse." Because he had already known I could run a boat, back then. So at 21 years old, I had my license. I had done trained for 3 years, running up and down, taking barges wherever I needed to bring them the whole time, uh, and I was going to be patient. But then I found out about the job on Ashley back then, at Triangle Capital Towboats. Bill Grantham and Tommy Grantham, who's here with Ingram still, they had Capital Towboats, and I went down there and applied for a spot on Ashley, and I don't know if you're familiar with old Gordon Verdon. Used to own the Gordon V Senior. Well, he was port
I
captain back.
yeah, I know the name, but I don't know that I've met him.
Yeah, well, Gordy was a port captain back then for Triangle Fleet, and Miss Allison Lomax was the I'm not sure what her title was, crew manager, I guess, or she managed the situation there. She said, "Well, I'll give you a shot if my port captain, let him test ride you, and if he says you're good to go, I'll give you a shot." So next morning, I go down there and I get on a boat, and Gordy, the two other captains that was on the boat, they had some red beans and rice cooked down there, and they said, "I'm gonna go down there and eat. Go make some shifts in the fleet. Get with the Addison. If uh, if you knock my plate of food on the floor, you don't got a job. But if you don't knock my plate of food on the floor, you got a job." I went and made some shifts and didn't knock his plate of food on the floor. So he come up and said, "Well, when can you start?" "I can start tomorrow morning." And that was pretty much how I got my start here at Triangle. So, like I said, that at the time it was Capital Towboats, and then I think a year or so, I don't think it was a whole year, and Midland owned the boats, uh, or Golf. They owned the boats, so they took them back from Capital Towing, and we become Midland. I worked for them until Ingram bought them. Uh, Little short break in '98, when they had the pilots agree deal went on, and but I was here when Ingram bought Midland and worked for them for a while till 2006. I left in 2006 to go work a day-for-day schedule because back then I'd bounce between the liveaboard boats and the fleet boats, and I liked the liveaboard, but I didn't like the 2-for-1 schedule on liveaboard. But then I'd work the fleet for a while, and then that commute back and forth every day, just I didn't like it a whole lot. So I'd kind of bounce back and forth wherever they needed me until I got a job doing 7 on, 7 off liveaboard, and that was pretty much what I've done since then until the AEP deal. And that was pretty good opportunity, even in the fleet, with the benefits and everything. I went ahead and took that, but of course, when that they got purchased, I went back to Turn Services, which is where I was working 7 and 7, and I've done that up until just a couple of years ago, and I come back over here. So
Keeping a plate of food on a table is a little bit different of a check ride than I think I've heard about more recently.
yeah,
But
yeah, it was different, but it was things were just a little different back then, I guess. But
well,
in that high river, the fact that I go out there and move some barges in the fleet without knocking his plate of food on the floor and headlining barges, and did a couple face up moves, a couple headlining moves, and hey, evidently he felt comfortable with me by the time he came back upstairs. So
one of the old captains I used to dispatch had me at the sticks and said, "Go ahead and try to land on a barge in the fleet there." And I feel like I knocked the refrigerator over in the galley down there, man.
yeah,
But
well, one of the things you say that one of the things I remember most about being a deckhand, and before I started coming up and steering the boat a lot, I was out there. I remember it, those spar barges, when you're trying to put a barge under an anchor block that doesn't have any barges on it already, when they come up under it and they're trying to catch the fore and aft, that thing dances on you. If you don't have another boat to hold it still, it just dances on you. So I'm trying to catch these wires. I mean, it's an empty spar barge, and you got a loaded barge trying to come under it. So it's a high-low tie. You trying to get up and down to tie it. And that guy running the boat's trying to hold that barge there. Well, I'm getting frustrated and I'm throwing my hands in the air. That was another thing. We didn't have handheld radios on all the boats, so everything was hand signals. And I'm throwing my hands up in the air and I'm getting pissed off. And Jack hollers over the PA system, "Come back here a minute." When I get back there, he's putting his life jacket on. He said, "You run the damn boat. I'm going to go tie it off. You're going to see how easy it is." So I tried. And I had a whole new respect after that because he went out there and he got the barge tied off, or the fore and aft caught on that side that I was already working on. And of course, getting the other side, you already had something to work with. So I was able to just steer around and he caught the other side. But when he came back, he said, "Now, do you see what I was fighting?" I said, "Yeah, I do." So that's the biggest lesson I think I got was right there to don't complain about him being able to hold the barge still because it wasn't very easy.
backtracking a little bit to one of the comments you made, how different are tow building policies between companies? And was it more varied back when you started than today?
I generally don't work with a whole lot of different companies anymore, so I can't tell you the differences between them. Some of you, some of you companies don't even really have a tow building policy. It's like cut your wires how you want. But ACBL, for instance, when AEP, we laid our straight fore and aft with AEP, and when you go to ACBL, they had a policy where everything had to be jockey fore and aft. And some of the boats would come into the fleet, we'd have the tow already straight fore and aft for the ones that were from AEP, and the ACBL boats wouldn't take the tow. So we had to adapt to their whole policy and everybody take them with jockey fore and afts. For the most part, we didn't really have any of that. But the different companies, one might lay a scissor breast, one might lay just regular uh, leads. Just it was just a little different back then. I mean, I guess every company was a little different in the way they made laid the wires.
Yeah, a guest on the show mentioned that he had a lot of trouble laying scissor wires. I admittedly know very little. I've never been on deck. I've never uh, taken a deckhand orientation course, nothing like that. But what is a scissor wire versus like you said, I think straight fore and aft or a jockey fore and aft? What are the differences?
Well, jockey fore and aft, it has its advantages with keeping the couplings from sliding out of whack. The toe will stay straighter, I guess, especially when you build and tow in a fleet that doesn't have a good spar barge system. It has its advantages once you learn the tricks to them and getting them caught. Uh, you land another barge on the side, it doesn't get knocked out of whack if there's any slack in it. Um, it's if the toe's built right, I guess either way does just fine. Just but if you lay one jockey fore and aft, they both have to be jockey fore and aft, to keep it from sliding because you can pull a barge out of whack if it's not done right. So I guess it was easier when you if you're working somewhere that doesn't have the time to properly train guys before they put them doing their own shift, um, which it still happens at times in some places. So a straight fore and aft is generally easier to get a new guy adapted to and go on about working.
Walk me through in whatever detail you can or that you can share, I suppose, about your time on deck, learning how to do this job. Maybe some interesting things that may have happened 30 years ago that wouldn't happen anymore today,
Oh
and then your advancement into the wheelhouse, which you kind of already touched on, but when you
well,
officially were cut loose.
man, it's just they didn't have near as many safety rules back then. And one, for instance, I remember picking up a shore wire onto an old rig we had here up at Darrow 180 fleet, and I was on the tow knee of a boat pulled up to the side, and I had to jump up on it and to get on the side of it. There was no ladder, so I had to just try to climb up it. And when I did, I stood up, and I stood up under the chute that the grain chute, split my head wide open, and they got me off the boat to go take me to get stitches, and I had to wait for a guy, the port captain back then. I'm not gonna say names, but he had to go drop movies off at the 6 Star Video or whatever video store. I think it was Blockbuster back then, actually. Uh, we had to go drop his movies off before he took me to the emergency room. So had priorities. It just the next night I was back to work too, with stitches in my head, whereas that probably wouldn't happen now. So I mean, don't get me wrong. I think some of these safety rules and all that, a lot of it is for the better, uh, by far in that aspect. Make sure guys are safe. But it just, I guess when you work like that, you work through anything really. I guess I remember a time I fell in a manhole cover that was covered in coke dust here at Darrow. Couldn't see the manhole was there. Stepped on it, fell down, busted my tailbone. Could barely walk, but I had to keep working because if I would have told him I was hurt, needed to go get checked out, I would have lost my Christmas bonus, which was not much. It was like an extra day or two's pay, but back then it meant a lot. I guess it does now too. But uh, I had to keep working through it because I didn't want to lose that extra day or two's pay that I was going to get in just a week away. So you didn't get it if you missed any work within a few weeks of Christmas. They wanted to make sure you was going to be there and not take off. Different times, man.
Did you fall down into the wing tank or just
Not
on
all the
deck?
way, just far enough. No, my feet went down into it and my tailbone caught on the deck. So I didn't go all the way into it, but I did fall. And you know, uh, another instance, I broke my wrist carrying wires out, um, from the levee to the boat. I threw the wire on the boat somehow or another. It twisted my wrist and broke something in my wrist, and again, I worked for about 3 weeks with that because it was another year close to Christmas, and I didn't want to make a claim or get off the boat right before Christmas, so I just kept working with a broke wrist. So just now you can't do that, and if somebody comes up and tells you, well, you got to report it. It's just again different times.
When did you see the safety culture change in the industry?
Hmm. I mean, it's been changing pretty much since then, but I also think it's geographical and who you work with, who you work for, because not that Cooper was small back then; it was Plimsoll back then. Uh, but when I went to Triangle Fleet working for Midland and such, it was already different then. Things really changed with the bigger companies.
Well, you'd mentioned pilots agree. How did you get involved in that? And I've heard a
Well,
little bit about it from other guests, but how did you, from your perspective, how did that work?
um, back then you didn't get raises very often. I got in the wheelhouse at $135 a day, and a lot of those captains had been making that same 135 a day for quite a few years. And if you did get a raise, which might have been every 4 years or so, you was lucky to get $5 a day raise. And also back then, it was a lot of supply and demand, is what the companies would tell you. So supply and demand was they had a lot of captains. They didn't have this whole steersman program and towars and all that stuff you had to sign off on, and you could either run a boat or you didn't. And you really didn't even have to know how to run a boat, and the company would hire you if you had the credentials. You could tell them you could run a boat, and they'd hire you. So even if they couldn't run a boat, they had a license. It was somebody willing to replace you if you told them no, you wasn't going to do it. So I was brought up. My dad was one of those guys who took a lot of barges for the horsepower of the boat. So the Okaloosa was known for back then. Hell, they were 1,350 horsepower, taking 16 loads all the way down to Myrtle Grove from Darrow in a 15-foot river at Carrollton. Couldn't stop them. You just follow them down, and if you had to stop for crew change, you flipped around to the point and let the eddy help you flip. Uh, so that's kind of what I was taught coming up. But then when I got in the wheelhouse on my own, it's what I knew, so I stuck with it. Uh, but you also had, if you didn't want to do it, they would also tell you that, well, we got somebody to replace you if you don't want to do it. So you kind of had to do it. So that was one of the things too, that they don't want to pay you no money to do the job, but also they would threaten you to replace you if you didn't do the job. So that's one of the things that's with the pilots agree was trying to change all that. And so because I was taking a lot of barges on small boats, 1,800 horsepower boats, taking 16 barges south, 20 barges north or so, we had a boat, the Enterprise Star, and it was a 4,200 horsepower boat back then, and we were taking 25 on it. And I just got on that boat when the strike was actually called. Now I was all for the strike. Then I got this job, and it was a pretty nice little raise in pay at the time. But I'd been on the Mobile Star for 15 days, and then I pulled 21 days on the Enterprise Star, and was only going to have 10 days off when it was time to come back. I got off the boat the morning of the strike before it was called, and I had family come down from Ohio, my sister-in-law and her husband and son. We went down to New Orleans and was sightseeing the French Quarter with them. And when I get home, we didn't have cell phones in '98, so when I get home, my messages on my answering machine was full, and it was the same guy, port captain that we had at the time, telling me if I'm not back on the boat at 5 a.m., he'll accept my resignation. I didn't give a resignation. So I call him. I said, "What are you talking about?" "Well, I know you know about the strike, so if you're not here at 5 a.m., I'll accept your resignation." I'm like, "Well, I'm not coming at 5 a.m. I got 10 days off due to me, and I'll see you in 10 days. Of course, I was hoping that it would all be over with by then, and, you know, just by not going back to work would be enough. And he said he would accept my resignation regardless if I tried taking my 10 days off. So the next morning, I was on the levee with my wife and daughter holding a picket sign. If you're going to force my hand at it, well, that's what I did. And I guess about a year later, some unfortunate events took place. A friend of mine that actually stayed working there had passed away of cancer. A good friend of ours. Uh, so it kind of worked out that I went back to work for him. Didn't lose my time, and so I agreed with the situation back then. I don't know that I'd want to ever do it again, uh, but it was needed at the time, and things have gotten a whole lot better out here in every way since then. But to some ways, because people don't get forced into taking barges that they're not happy with, you got some people that have a mental system and just so I think the caliber, people that trained was is different. So you got some guys now that take a 2,000 horsepower boat, want to push 3 or 4 barges with it, and that's it. I'm talking about small barge regulations, not jumbos at all. So it's gotten better in a lot of ways, and some not so much.
What horsepower is the Tennessee that you're on now?
7,200 horsepower.
And what's your normal boat?
The Carroll McManus is, but because of low water and that boat being a shallower draft, they needed to run to Columbus and back right now. So they got us filling in on this boat as a turn boat. That's what I do here with them. Is we'll go above Baton Rouge every now and then, but for the most part, we try to keep the other boats turning at Baton Rouge or further up if possible, and keep them rolling. And we do the deliveries and such.
Is the Carroll a 9,000?
It is.
Okay. Well, you've worked, sounds like, every kind of boat. I mean, how different are the challenges in the fleet versus in this current gig?
Man, I've done east, I've done west, so canals and all. Every one of them had their challenges. You have to know what you're doing wherever you go. That east or that west canal rather, it gets tight back there. It's shallow. We're dealing with that out here right now, but it's shallow in places back there where you bump bottom right in the middle. You just keep going. Uh, you go through places like home with the wind blowing, and you got boats, yachts tied up on both sides of you. You got to try to keep it running. You can't just stop. So everywhere has their challenges. I like these big boats. They're more comfortable. They handle the tows pretty dang well. You got a lot of barges out there, but these things do some pretty amazing work. But and you get above Baton Rouge, it gets pretty tight up there too. Buoy lines and stuff. And I'd I'd probably say that when that sounder goes off, that you in shallow water, the first few times that happens, give you a heart attack. Especially now, when the water's real low, you never know. You might be 20 miles from the nearest fleet boat. You break apart, you're in a bind. So I'd say they all have their challenges. I just get paid a little better now for those challenges.
What's the biggest tow you've been behind?
Northbound was 49, and southbound, which I think was 40. We did 40 turning the Bronson Ingram one time a couple years ago, and took it down. But that was just from 100-mile point down, right below 100-mile point down. So it wasn't that big a deal, and it was low water. So uh, mostly 35. We do 35 quite often when the conditions allow it.
Was that 49? That was 7x7?
Yes, northbound 7x7.
So that's what, 1,400 feet long by
Yeah.
how wide? 70, 140, 210.
Yeah.
What, about 250 feet wide? Something like that.
Well, my math ain't
Anyway,
mathing right now, but yeah,
well,
close.
whatever the case, tell me about that run, being behind 49 barges.
Again, these boats do a pretty amazing job. It was impressive. When you come off of small boats and you have 12 barges in front of you, and you're lucky to make 5 miles an hour, and then you get behind these things and 49 of them, you're making 7 and 8 miles an hour with them. And you give it 3 degrees of rudder, just 3 degrees on these boats, and just, of course, just be patient for a second. It'll start turning. Some people still go hard over to hard over, just because they want it steered right now, but they do pretty good. Especially the Carroll's a short boat. So that tow looks bigger than, say, on this Dennis Bottorff, even though it's 7,200, it's a tall boat. And it's amazing what 1 or 2 stories taller makes a tow look like, because a fleet boat pulls up next to you on this thing and it looks like a little Tonka toy down there. Whereas the Carroll's only, 3 decks tall with a half a height electronics room. And so the tow looks pretty large out there. But it's perspective, which is one of the reasons that boat doesn't do 40 southbound, is because you can't quite see over the corners as well, being shorter. And that's one of the reasons they only take 35 for the most part from Columbus down on it. Whereas the other 9,000s that do 40, you know, Baton Rouge down, we did 40 turning someone, but that was because you got a lot more river width down here, not as tight of a quarters.
Any horror stories over the years of your time at the Sticks?
Uh, I've been pretty fortunate, knock on wood. I've been pretty fortunate with not being in no deadly situations myself. I'd probably say one of the scariest moments that I've had since I've been in the wheelhouse myself was Hurricane Ida. We was down there at Miro Fleet holding a bunch of barges pushed into the bank, and wind shifted directions. I had a 2,000 horsepower boat out on the head holding barges in on me, and me back there with a 4,200, the American Pharaoh. And wind shifted directions, blew us out in the river, and there wasn't shit we could do with it. I tried my best to hold it in there, and the wind just blew us right across the river. And once it started going, I guess we changed our plan. Instead of fighting it, well, let's go with it and try to get on across as quick as we can. And when we got out in the middle of the river, right at lower 9 Mile Point, there was some pretty big rollers coming up the river, big enough that the waves was crashing over my Texas deck on the stern of the boat. And with that came a lot of bouncing. And the boat was 120 feet long, but it bounced us out of our face wires on one side, 4-part Kevlar wires. It popped, and my nephew was my mate at the time, and he sharpened both fire axes, or 2 fire axes. He sharpened them before the storm even hit. And at the time, I was like, man, look, you getting a little carried away. I wouldn't have even thought to do that. I was like, okay, fine, do it if that's what you feel comfortable with. But later on, when that storm blew us out, and that side, we popped the starboard face wires, and we was getting turned sideways and about to get blown up under the tow. He's out there with that axe standing in water crashing over, and he cut us loose. So them axes paid off. And just trying to back away from the tow, the stern of the boat going up out the water with every swell. The boat didn't want to handle. It didn't want to maneuver worth a flip. So when we finally got back to the fleet and safe spot, I'd say that's the biggest adrenaline rush that I've had since I've been out here. I've had quite a few when I was younger, catching barges, breakaways in high river, such like that. You get yourself in some tight situations trying to catch barges and but overall, I'd say that was probably the scariest moment.
Yeah, the Ida was not very nice to us. I know the Schmang went down in a triangle. Luckily, everybody got off. I think there was an injury with just one of the guys, and we had a boat standing by down there at Zito, Algiers,
Hmm.
and I think something came through the pilot house windows.
Um, was that the David Cert?
I believe so.
think I think the window did blow out of that boat, if I recall.
Yeah, pretty wild night, man. We were a couple, which it was weeks, maybe even a month, trying to track down everything that was lost. But anyway, any other storm stories from over the years?
I've been pretty fortunate. I've rode out a lot of storms, and I honestly was never scared of a storm because I always felt the boat was probably safest place to be. I think I have a little different perspective of that now. So I'm not scared of a storm now, but I do see things a little bit different than I did prior to that. And of course, my wife and them rode it out. We live in Louisiana. Years ago we tried to evacuate for Hurricane Rita. We rode out Katrina. I was home. We got twin girls and three daughters, but so the twins was a year old at the time when Katrina hit, and they were on heart monitors. And we rode out Katrina, but then I think it was a month later or so, Rita was coming, and my wife's like, "Yeah, we're not staying for this." So we jumped in the car and we drove all the way to Jonesboro, Arkansas, before we could find somewhere to get a hotel. No, none were available until Jonesboro, Arkansas. And by the time we checked in and seen the news, well, the storm had done moved over toward Texas and Lake Charles area. So we were safe anyway. So we turned around and drove back home. And we haven't evacuated since then because you don't have really anywhere to go if you wait too late to do it. But after Hurricane Ida, we sold the camper trailer and bought a motorhome, but we stayed with a small one that my wife can jump in and she can drive out of here if she needs to. At least if she gets to North Mississippi or Memphis where she's safe from high winds and she can't find a hotel, well, she can find a Walmart parking lot somewhere and just crank the generator. So that was a big reason we did a RV was after that. She said, that we had 100+ mile an hour winds across my house here in Albany, Louisiana, and she said never again. She will not stay for another one, and I don't blame her. So
Right. Switching gears a little bit. I know, of course, Justin Montgomery was one that you've trained. How many steersmen have you had over the years?
I don't really count them too much. Some of the guys are only with me for a little while, and I try to help anybody that wants it. If they want it and they're a good deckhand, I don't mind training them. Uh, I've had some I've turned away. If you're a lazy deckhand, you might be a lazy captain, and I don't want that on my name. So I've had some pretty good ones though, and Justin was one that he was my lead man at AEP, and him and um, Charlie Gabriel down there. When I first went to AEP, I didn't know the computer, so they put Charlie Gabriel with me as my steersman. He taught me how, all the computer work. Up until that point, everything I did was paper logs. We didn't have computers, and so I trained him for quite a while. He was my steersman there for at least 6 months, and then when I went to Belmont Fleet, Justin was my lead man, and he wasn't in the steersman program, but he wanted it. He was a good worker. He wanted it. He was up there like I used to do, and he'd run up there and every chance that he could take the sticks, he was doing it. So again, if you're willing to do it, I'm willing to give it to you. And but I've had a few, I guess.
It's like Justin kind of followed your lead. I know he went to turn for quite a while on the American Pharaoh, and now he's a Triangle Fleet.
Yeah, he worked the fleet for Turn for a while, and when they ended his job up here close to home, they moved him down to Miro Fleet. That was quite a bit of a drive for him, and he hung it in there for over a year or so. He made that drive back and forth to Miro from where he lives. It was a good hour and a half without traffic. So when I put in my notice at Turn, uh, I had asked them if they would, maybe consider Justin Montgomery, and that I would even train him for my last stitch on the boat. I would train him, and he stayed steering longer than just that. But he come with me for a week before I left, and I was able to, show him some pointers up and down between Baton Rouge and Myrtle Grove, and then he stayed steering with the other captain that was with me, Captain Tommy, and so yeah, he filled the spot that I left open. He's a good little wheelman though. He adapts pretty good. As far as him coming to Ingram, yeah, that was another one of them moves. It was a good move for him. A lot closer to home, fleet spot, secure fleet spot. It's not just going away. Uh, so we think, nothing's ever permanent out here. So it's been there quite a while though. So that was a good move for him.
Any good stories coming to mind about Justin or Charlie that might embarrass him a little bit if they watch this?
Oh man. Yeah, one night Justin tried pulling a fast one on me when he was a deckhand. And we were trying to tie barges off. And I needed him to catch me something to shove into so that I could hold the barges still. I was trying to close the stern up, but if I would have fell into it with the way they laid the wires, the head would have gapped out because they didn't do a short tier wire. They laid everything with a long lead. So I told him to catch me something to push into so that I could push up and then swing the stern in. I don't have the rigging for that. I said, well, then catch me a safety line and I'll come put rigging out for you. So I put him in a spot and he did that. When I got up there was a lot of rigging on the head that he could have tied. He was just trying to do it his way. So it was a stormy night, and since he did that to me, I went and got the rigging flat, and we picked up rigging all night the rest of the night. And the other boats that was there, they uh they said, "What do you have?" Nothing. We got this. Y'all take a break. So I kept him and his guys that was out there with him. They had to pick up all the rigging in the fleet that night, and so he still laughs about that, and he talks about how I knew he could run a boat, but I said I'm going to teach you how to work. Yeah, but we're really good friends now. He's a great guy. I got a lot of respect for him, his work ethic. Uh, Good guy.
Tell me about life at AEP. How long did you say you were there?
From 2013 to till the ACBL purchase. So I really liked it. AEP was a company that they threw money at you, bonuses, holiday pay. They whatever the office got, you got it. The bonuses were really good. Very nice equipment. They did not mind fixing their boats, which the way they leased everything, they pretty much had to keep them in good shape. But just overall, I've never worked for anybody that had the equipment that they had. And when something broke, they didn't band-aid it. They fixed it. So it was really nice, man. And when that purchase went up, the whole deal where AEP had to sell it to update their coal plants to natural gas or whatever they did for their power plants. That that was really a heartbreaker because I didn't think I'd ever leave that place. But I went back to turn service, and there was nothing wrong with them. I mean, it just the benefits and everything. I was looking at my future, and I really thought AEP was just going to be a really good move, and I don't regret it because without doing that, I wouldn't have got to be as good a friends as I am with Justin and Charlie Gabriel down there, and a few other guys. They got some good guys there, man. They had a young wheelhouse crew, but at that time, I had already. I guess I was going through a spell where I didn't even want to train people no more. I was tired and I just wanted to do it on my own. Didn't want to have people up there in the wheelhouse with me. But when I went there and got with some of these young guys, uh, I started enjoying training again. So it was a good move to do for that reason alone. Just working around uh, new new ideas, I guess, bringing in you young guys, just so it kind of refreshed my mindset on things.
Did you stick with ACPL at all, or did you make the jump immediately to turn?
No, I stayed long enough to get my bonus, and I didn't have no bad dealings with ACBL, but when all the boats that them safety boats all had bumpers around them, real nice boats with good solid bumpers. And the day of the merger was November, sometime in November, 15th, I think, maybe comes to mind. The safety challenge had come around College Point with a tire hanging off the back of it, and I knew right then. I said, "Oh, so much for our nice boats." And I had heard that they had openings up over there on a firm for turn services. So since it changed and I seen the other changes that was taking place, I said, look, I called up Brad Chauvin down there at Turn and said, hey, I said, I know you got a spot back on my old boat, they're firm. You know, if you want, I'll come back, but I got to stick around where I'm at until I get my bonus. It's one of the things AEP did. They looked out for their people. And the bonus that we had already earned for the year, they made sure ACBL paid it out. So I stayed till February 1st, got my bonus, and I went on to, which I gave a 2-week notice and all, but I went back to Turn. And I was with Turn until 21, February of 2021, I think it was. And or 22 rather, I'm sorry. And I left. Not to come directly to Ingham. I went to Southern Towing for a couple trips, but just my dad had passed away in 2021, and no, it was 2020. I'm lost on it, but that was a big mind thing with me. Just I needed some change in my life, after dad passed away, and wanted to make some changes, and that was one of them. For one, getting rid of the captain spot. Now I just ride pilot, and so getting away from that. That was one of the things I wanted to do.
How different is life on the boat as a pilot versus a captain?
Oh, it's a lot different. Uh, you still responsible for people's safety and all when you driving a boat, so you have to be alert in that aspect. But as far as taking care of any kind of issues going on or grocery budgets, all out of it, I just man, look, I just drive the boat. If somebody comes up there complaining to me, wanting to fuss about things, I'm like, I'm not trying to put it off on the captain, but at the same time, I'm like, hey, you need to come back up here at 5 o'clock this evening. Uh, so it allows me to do what I actually enjoy doing, and that's pushing the toes and doing that.
Where were you running for turn? Right? Were you on the Affirm that whole time?
No, what they bought the American Pharaoh and was pushing for MG, and so they bought the American Pharaoh, and we were running from Tiger Fleet down to United Bulk Plant IMT, United Bulk, Turn, Myrtle Grove, and just back and forth. So we'd average 1.5 to 2 trips a week. Working 7 and 7, we'd make 1.5 to 2 trips a week back and forth, Baton Rouge, Tiger Fleet, and as many as 25 loads southbound, which is what got me, got my foot in the door over here at Ingram, is that I was already pushing 25 with a 4200. It wasn't that big of an uh, adapt to what we're doing on here with 35 on a 9000 or on a Carroll anyway. And same on here, we're doing 30 with a 72, but um, so it was a big step in that advancement to that. I still come on and posted with these guys for a little bit until I had like 3 different pilots for Ingram say, yeah, he's ready to go. He's got this. So I cut loose the second hitch out here with him, rode for a hitch posting with him.
What's the biggest challenge you face these days? I know us dispatchers are good for sending revisions.
Yeah.
How problematic is that for you?
There's going to be some revisions, but sometimes when you get 2 or 3 of them within a 5 or 10 minute period and you already start working on a revision, then another one comes, it makes you want to just close the computer and just don't touch it. Wait until they finalize this. So uh, sometimes it would probably be pretty helpful if y'all would look at it, say, okay, let me think on that a little bit before I send it out, instead of just sending a bunch of revisions back to back. Sometimes we'll send a diagram to somebody already with the revisions, and 5 minutes later, you sending me another revision. And when you keep sending those revisions to these fleet boats, they're going to do the same thing that I was saying, and they're going to say, I'm not touching that tow until they get here. So instead of starting on a tow for you ahead of time, they just close their computer and go do something else. So it would be helpful as a dispatch to look it over real good and then walk away from it for a little bit and think of anything else that you might want to change before you actually send it out. Um, and there's going to be revisions. It's the nature of the beast out here, but just not so many.
I agree completely with you, man. Before I jump to my last topic of interest here, do you have any stories, any highlights or lowlights that come to mind from 33 years out there that we haven't already covered?
Not too many. I mean, look, it's always been towboat. It's what it is. You're going to go with the changes. Um, there's a lot of stuff, with subchapter M and all. The boats are actually, yeah, they got to keep them in better shape now. So that's good. It has its pluses and minuses, nowadays you got companies wanting to put cameras everywhere. Uh, I'm not, we don't have a camera in the wheelhouse over here at Ingram. I'm not real fond of the idea if they ever did, but I guess if they do, they do. I'm on the clock. So just, you're here for a job.
What do you think of subchapter M? Pluses, minuses, positive, negatives? What do you what's your take on it?
I think it, I think it, put a lot of small people out of business, a lot of expense. I kind of put it on par with like the emissions crap they do to guys with diesel trucks and such, just I don't think the emissions and such are as big of a thing as they're making it out to be. I'm not, you know, I think it just adds a lot of paperwork myself. It has a lot of paperwork. It has, it does have some good things because the safety rules, the safety of the boats, that's all good stuff. I like being on a safe boat, and you know, I was on a pretty good boat when Hurricane Ida hit, and I'm glad I did. You know, everything was watertight doors, all that stuff worked. Uh, Before all these safety rules took place and such, you didn't always have that stuff. You didn't always have good seals. Uh, Making sure things are in good shape, that's a plus. So I'd say there's more pluses to it than there is minuses, but of course we all get tired of extra paperwork. So again, that's one of the reasons why I'm not high captain anymore either. Just it allows me, yes, I make less money than the captain, but I'm okay with that. I do okay without it. And not saying I won't ever do cap's job again, but I'm pretty comfortable with being a pilot too.
Without a doubt. Now, you and I spoke months ago. I did an episode about the RC Capella incident with the cooperative spirit.
Correct.
You mentioned to me that there was some simulator work that you went through in Paducah. Is that correct regarding that incident?
Yes. Yes.
Can you tell me about that?
Well, the communication for one, that's a big key aspect of everything. But I want to be selective on what I say because I don't want to judge anybody that, you know, what took place. The guy behind the sticks, I mean, there was a lot involved. There was a ship coming up behind him. Um, just trying to be selective on it. I don't want to talk down on anybody because I don't know. I wasn't at the sticks of either one of those boats. So only thing I really want to say about the whole situation is try to keep your radios turned up, talk to each other out here. You know, communication's key. Uh, you know, just pay attention because that could have been avoided. I don't really want to go too much into it though.
Easy enough, but I know you got to get back to the stakes in about 5 hours time, so I'll let you get to sleep, Cap.
Okay. But well, I appreciate you. I'm glad we got this done. I know we've been uh missing each other quite a few times trying to set it up, so it's done now. But I appreciate it. You know, I wasn't trying to avoid you all these times. Just timing. Just I'm glad I was able to make it work this time.
Absolutely, bud. Thanks again. We'll talk soon.
All right. Thank you.
All right.
This has been a production of Where You At Studios, LLC.